Okay, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Hello, everybody. Hope you are doing great. You are watching FOADEBATE. In this interview, it's my privilege to welcome Anthony James Hall, Emeritus Professor of Liberal Education and Globalization Studies at the University of Lethbridge in Alberta, Canada. Today, we will explore the economic policies of Trump administration toward U.S. allies and their long-term geopolitical repercussion. I trust this dialogue will prove both thought-provoking and insightful for our audience. Anthony, welcome, and good to be with you.
Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Let's get started with Trump's economic policies and their ramifications. What motivated the Trump administration's confrontational economic stance toward traditional allies? Were these measures primarily aimed restructuring trade agreement, or did they reflect deeper strategic objectives?
Well, I'm not sure that Trump really understands this himself. He seems to be, very moody and swing from position to position. His tariff ideas have enormous implications, and they don't seem to be very well thought out. They don't seem to conform with, a larger policy. He seems to think that it's okay to punish people with tariffs because of their political positions and such. I have to say that the real Trump, the most appealing Trump that I've seen so far, that gives me some sense that there is something authentic in how he was portraying himself, was coming out of the meeting in Alaska, where I did notice, even back in his first term, he seems to be drawn to Putin. I don't know if it has something to do with his towers, the Trump towers that he builds, where he seems to have a lot of people who buy these condominiums are Russian people, but he seems to have sort of been drawn to Putin. Maybe Putin embodies the kind of permanent, stable government that, he would fantasize that he could provide, which he can't, because it's kind of like watching a person in grade 6 or something trying to figure out the world. It's an amazing to see. He's typical American in that regard. Americans are known for not knowing very much about the rest of the world. And, as a Canadian, you feel that very much. Here we are right next door to them, and they know almost nothing about our country. He manifests, just sort of ignorance and lack of understanding. But when he's with Putin, it seems that Putin, or the people around him, or Lavrov, they seem to have studied him. They seem to have an awareness of who he's taking his orders from, the pressures that he is under. And so when I saw him come out of Alaska, this had a big meaning for me, that Alaska, the U.S. purchased Alaska from Russia at a time when the U.S. government was preparing to annex British North America, or at least the western part of British North America. And so this idea of obtaining Alaska from Russia, this was a U.S. geopolitical move against basically annexing Canada, doing away with Canada. And this is something that he's still talking about. So Russia, has this role in Alaska. I would very much like to see some kind of extension of the Belt and Road Initiative under the Bering Strait or over the Bering Strait, or, I think this is really important for the world. I hear you talking about, how great it is to see Russia putting all its effort towards the East and developing resources in the East. And even that idea of ExxonMobil sort of coming into a project and then being not in the project, but there still seems to be some kind of flirting with ExxonMobil getting involved. I have a sense that Trump is truly seeing if he could bring this sort of historic bad nightmare of this demonization of Russia, of the Soviet Union, of the communists, this whole way that that country, continues to be painted and stereotyped in people's minds, that if he could overcome that, and you feel that he has some sense of, that could be his destiny, that could really make a mark on him. When I see Alaska, I think of the Spanish developing that area. The Hudson's Bay Company actually got down to California. They were colonizing that area on behalf of Great Britain in the fur trade. The fur trade actually had, two different dimensions. One was based in England, the Hudson's Bay Company, and one was based in Montreal. So there was this internal competition. So along the west coast there, including Alaska, what is now British Columbia, what is now Washington, what is now California, there was a long period where it was sort of in flux. There was a kind of multipolar effect taking place. And, one of the big breakthroughs for John Jacob Astor was, when he got this fur trader in the United States, got his people to the West Coast, he could go over and participate in the opium trade. And so the U.S. had a very early entry into the opium trade, and then he eventually sold out and bought real estate in New York. Anyway, this idea of seeing this unfolding in Alaska and seeing him emerge with, like his head screwed on right for a moment, it seemed, with some kind of picture, and everybody was thinking about Ukraine. It's very humiliating being in a part of the world where our government, just immediately identifies with Ukraine, that stupid politics, that stupid militaristic way of saying, we just got to have Russia as the enemy. If we don't have Russia as the enemy, who are we? What, how do we even picture ourselves? This going on in Western Europe, and and Canada is following suit. So this possibility of a kind of large-scale enterprise involving U.S., the big famous corporations that have kind of been demonized, in the climate change bullshit, ExxonMobil, seeing them coming in and flirting with all of this. I feel that that's where things are headed. But the economics from the U.S. point of view has become so severe. The fiat currency system is so overextended, and the idea that you use the economic system to do damage to your enemies and put sanctions on your enemies, and you end up using economics as a kind of warfare, a warfare actually played out ultimately with actual weapons of mass destruction and actual military forces sort of expressing the force behind these economic agendas. And so, I hear you often sort of looking with glee over in Iran. You're near to China, you're near to India, you're near to Afghanistan. You're looking to the east, and you're seeing BRICS and the rise of BRICS, and you're seeing the rise of Russia and China and Iran, and the reality that this initiative is creating an alternative to the old, really corrupt colonial system that we've inherited from, Columbus since 1492, put it that way. This short but dramatic era of Europe claiming the world, and then going to great extents to, enslave people and steal their resources, and, things like happen in the Belgian Congo and whatnot. And the, optimism you look in seeing an alternative to this, whereas in Canada, like, why should we be joining NATO, and why should we be putting a bunch of money into NATO? What is NATO anymore? Why can't Canada be friends with Russia? We have a great deal in common. The big one being we're the two Arctic countries of the world. Like, we're the two places where the northern winter, really does define our life in many ways. Of course, the great white north in both countries is very sparsely settled. We do have population that is mostly settled in Canada in a few urban centers within 100 miles of the USA, but there is this vast frontier, which is sort of is a yearning, is a sense of, this is the future. This is what we can bequeath to our progeny. But of course, it's always been in danger of being annexed by the United States. That's why the United States did purchase Alaska. And so we're sort of doomed into this situation. And how can you, think the government of Zelensky and Kolomoisky behind him is sort of a legitimate expression of anything approaching democracy. Ukraine has become sort of famous as a child trafficking center, an organ trafficking center, underground, black market in weapons. All of this money going into Ukraine, becomes sieved off to all the most corrupt elements in the United States, throughout the West, and to feel sort of trapped into this. There's not even a context in Canada, for instance, to politicize this. One feels like a voice in the wilderness. But especially since coming back from Iran in 2014 and getting a chance to look at the world from that point of view, most of my life I felt there's no representation in the parliamentary system that I belong to. Like, both parties, adhere to the same policies, basically. And I guess this is a phenomena throughout the West. There's a kind of monopoly, and somehow the sellout of the sort of predator class. Let's face it, like, there is a predominance of pedophilia and sexual perversion that you just see. You see it in Zelensky, you see it in Trudeau, you see it all through the system, that the decadence, that the pure evilness, and this kind of Jewish approach, this Zionist approach, where you want the most corrupted people possible in power, so you have the most on them, so they have the least independence. And I'm pretty sure that Trump is being manipulated by Mossad and by Jeffrey Epstein and all of that. And you really don't need the files to go into the Jeffrey Epstein files. Like, it's all out in the open. It's on the open internet that Trump himself has a long history of raping children, and including little boys, and making settlements with the families. And some say, well, why did he go bankrupt 6 times? His different companies go bankrupt while he's disseminating a constant flow of money to make settlements, especially with the parents of some of these children and underage people. So Trump isn't over this. I think Trump is going to has an opportunity to do something in relationship to Putin, say, but he's going to have to just say, whatever you've got on me, however you're bribing me, however whatever you've got in the files that you'll show if I get out of line. He's just going to have to bite the bullet and say, well, show it, go ahead, because this situation that he's in now, where he seems to be constantly reeled in and manipulated, and who would have the goods on him? Who would be the expert in bribing people and intimidating people and using blackmail? It would be Netanyahu himself. And he's obviously got a lot on Trump, and he's obviously using it in a way. So all of this, how are we going to blow this off? But the fact that I can talk to you about this right now, that makes me feel, so that there's some kind of hope. We are speaking across a pretty large bridge. The level of understanding of what's really going on in Iran, is not that high around here. One of the things that came through with the last invasion and the response to the last invasion, on June the 13th, is coming to terms with the fact that Iran is deeply infiltrated by the Israeli government, by agents, and that was being talked about, and the fact that so many of these episodes on June the 13th were done from within Iran, by Mossad agents who'd sort of set up camp in Iran. And I guess, the history of Iran, where so many Israelis are Iranians. And so, that those families, must have networks of influence and such. This came through when you looked at the death of Hassan Nasrallah, who was probably the most influential, inspirational figure to arise with in Islam maybe ever. And he was a wise person with military skills, with strategic understanding, but also a deep, authentic devotion and commitment to average people and a willingness to work with them. The idea that it was some agent of Israel, maybe who was Iranian, who gave the information about where Nasrallah would be and when he would be there, that this is part of this, situation where Iran and the Israeli security state are, much more deeply intertwined than we're able to understand outside. The tragedy of that, I think now there's open discussion about what really happened to Raisi. Was this an early instance of the decapitation approach? This idea that Israel just murders anybody, anywhere they want, no matter what role they have in negotiations or whatever, that there's no limits to their ability to track down their enemies and murder them whenever and wherever they want. The Qatar episode sort of underlines how far this has gone, how extreme this has gone.
And could these actions have irreversibly undermined U.S. global leadership? Or is there room for future administrations to mend these ties?
Well, I got into playing around with this phrase regime change, which is kind of it sounds innocuous, but it's like collateral damage or something. It's a PR turn of phrase. But regime change, especially in the inheritor of the Persian civilization, and saying that you're going to, destroy the existing regime in Iran with all of that historical heritage, with all of that, symbolic significance in the way the world, the history of civilization and how civilization continues to unfold. The casual way it's applied, well, they're not really, trying to stop the nuclear weapons from developing. What they want is regime change. And it's sort of said as a, simple thing. Well, it's not that complicated, regime change. But then I think to myself, well, the real country that needs regime change is Israel. Mm-hmm. Israel has demonstrated that, its behavior is just unacceptable. Remember that South Africa in the mid-70s, when it was full on apartheid, and actually used the term and made no bones about it. I don't recall the Bantustans being bombed by the white minority regime. I don't recall their hospitals being, destroyed. But in any case, there was sanctions against South Africa. There were punishments. South Africa could no longer play a role in the General Assembly. And it was prohibited. There were things that were done to punish South Africa. And it seems to me that on a scale of things, these things were, far less than what Israel has done. When you think of Israel with the pagers, for instance, or the walkie-talkies, and just distributing among a group of people, a large, diverse group of people, some of whom are included among your enemies, but there's no way to know what little child is going to end up with the pager in his hand, or there's no way that the pager automatically adheres to a Hezbollah member or something, and such an approach, a sort of open-ended approach to just doing damage to a diverse population that include the group that you don't like. I mean, this is terrorism, and it's opening up a new era of degradation of humanity, that we have to think of all our devices as potential bombs from now on, and that by introducing this to in this particular instance, it opens the territory for other people to do the same thing and try the same thing. I mean, this is just one of so many crimes we could discuss, which and plus the fact of the kind of security study that takes place in Israel, the kind of using the internet as a device for spying and to set people up for murder and this kind of thing. What a negative thing this is for society as a whole, and the fact that Israel's approach to the internet is to have backdoors on everything. I think that's what was going on with Telegram and Durov. He wouldn't give over the code, so for the backdoors. And so when Netanyahu talks about super Sparta and looking down the road to the isolation of Israel, and I think he's thinking, well, we can't just depend on the United States so much anymore to make all the weapons, especially our secret stuff. So we're going to have to isolate ourselves and be self-sufficient in ways. And he spooked a lot of people and undermined the stock market when he talked about Israel as a super Sparta. Sparta, of course, was a warrior cult in a city-state against Athens, largely in Greece, and has a big role in history. So he invokes all of this history and with respect to what we could expect of the future of Israel. But thinking of Israel with all its murderous schemes and whatnot, just developing its own private little sphere where it's going to build the worst kind of destructive devices and continue to claw down civilization and take us to the very depth of indignity, to make sure that all our leaders are so bathed in their own corruption, are so bathed in their own perversity, and so bathed in their own attraction to children, and the rape of children as some kind of big turn on. I mean, this, we've got to deal with this, and the fact that Mossad is using this, and it's out there in the public. I mean, this is the Jeffrey Epstein case contains so much within it. So regime change, when you talk about regime change, why not Israel? And then when you talk about the United States and the future of the United States, I mean, Israel there's no distinction any longer between the government of Israel and the government of the United States. These are two merged entities. And, the genocide is on the United States as much as on Israel, I would say. And in a certain sense, Biden and then now Trump, they could be kind of perceived as the CEO, the chief executive officer of this genocidal operation, because ultimately it's Trump who's signing off on all of this. It's the United States that is providing these atrocious types of bombs and all of this, no doubt, a lot of secret stuff that we don't know exactly what it's doing. But we do know that whatever, although we think we're well informed about what's going on in the Gaza genocide, the fact that there's this intensity of wanting to kill journalists and want to prevent things from being seen in that way, what do we not even have any idea that's happening there? And we know that the history of the Israeli relationship with the Palestinians is that these are sort of used as lab rats to test various software, various psychological operations, various forms of torture, and then military people and heads of police come from all over the world and take seminars within Israel, where this history of fighting the Palestinians, trying to pacify the Palestinians, to hold the Palestinians away from realizing their ambitions and undermining and torturing them and ruining their perceptual realms and all of this, this is sort of what the world can expect, that this is a kind of laboratory experiment underway with Planeteer and these new generation of really horrific companies. This Karp fellow, hearing him speak, it's horrific. Or Peter Thiel, who's setting up J.D. Vance to become the next president of the United States. So in saying that there needs to be regime change in Israel, it seems to me an extension that you could say there needs to be regime change in the United States, and it clearly has something to do with this little concept that I read a 700-page book on the history of Zionism before 1948, and seeing all of these strands of Zionism compete and converge, and socialist Zionism and communist Zionism, and the whole discussion within the Jewish community of the need for such a community. And then there was a long period of time where they thought about, having some kind of reconciliation with the local Arab population and some kind of federation or some kind of peacemaking provisions or structures to accompany Zionism. But, after 1948, it's sort of, no, we're not going to do any of that now. We've got the big powers behind us, and so we're just going to do genocide. And of course, what we see in the last 2 years is sort of an acceleration of a pre-existing genocide. And I can't think of anything like it in history. I mean, Auschwitz, they had hospitals there. I don't remember anybody bombing the hospitals. The use of food as a way to kill people, which Netanyahu is being charged with, and Yoav Gallant, by the International Criminal Court. And then the effort is to destroy the International Criminal Court. What happened to the International Court of Justice? The older court, the major court. Anyway, so this need for regime change, let's consider it, in its practical terms. Like, Iran is, definitely not perfect, and there are all kinds of constituencies within Iran who would like to see adjustments and whatnot. But now that there is this common attack, it does seem to have generated a sense of unity and common purpose. Although, I still am watching to see about, this infiltration of the Israeli security state within the Iranian state. There's still not much reporting on that. And I guess there's obvious reasons you wouldn't want that publicized too much. But it does seem that is a kind of existential issue for Iran to deal with that in some respects, which, with this complex history where, where do Jews come from? I mean, the captivity, the Babylonian captivity, the freeing of the Jews to go back to the Holy Land, this mythology, or however we're to conceive of it. The Iran-Jewish relationship is so old and complex and many-faceted that it's still an issue. So that's what when we look at the future of the United States, it can't go on with this idea that Israel is going to call the shots. The people who can take power in the United States are the people who are most corrupted or most tainted with the worst sort of indications, make them most vulnerable to blackmail, to be bribed. That this can't go on this way. And, this is not a question that these are not issues that can be fixed with small reforms. There's a structural issue that has arisen. So when you talk about the future of the United States, this regime change concept, if we're going to talk about it, this applies across the board, right? Like, let's talk about it, because it's not immediately clear to me why, of all the countries in the world, Iran is most in need of a regime change, which is what we're essentially being told. Or not told, because we're really being told, oh, no, we've got to intervene so they don't get the nuclear weapons. We've got, Netanyahu has been saying this for 30 years. It's in 2 weeks, it's in 2 years, it's in 5 years, it's in 6 months. It's, he's cried wolf so often that nevertheless, people have no history, and they are very easy to sway the common people who, oftentimes just don't have a historical context to see anything. And so they can maybe be persuaded yet again that if we don't do something, Iran is going to, nuclear weapons, that's a question for the world. And it's a big question with Israel up front. Israel that, had to participate in taking out John Fitzgerald Kennedy, president of the United States, because he was standing in the way of getting nuclear weapons. And so the first person on the list of who has to be addressed when it comes to getting some international order into the realm of nuclear weapons is Israel.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Thank you so much for your comprehensive answers. You covered most of my questions. Actually, let's jump to strategic goals of BRICS. How is BRICS attempting to construct a viable economic and political counterweight to the U.S.-led system?
Well, as I say, I follow BRICS, but it seems like I'm watching through a lot of haze and obstruction. Pepe Escobar has sort of become a kind of, I think he's working with Putin, and he's in an information, a communication group. When I answered this before, I found the concept of the non-aligned movement, that what is going on is quite in line with that. The history of colonization of European powers over most of the world became the colonies of these European powers. And then, it was supposed to end with the formation of the United States and the creation of the General Assembly of the United Nations, and every one of these colonies would become an independent country. But of course, economic means became the new form of to continue the old varieties of colonization's new system. So I take it that BRICS is, people are being increasingly assertive to say we're going to use our own currencies and buy and sell within our own system. One thing that, the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency, there's still a lot of power to that. When I say $100, it's worth $100. It's really the only way in the world that there's a sort of common system. If I said, 100 rupees or 100 pesos or whatever, people wouldn't know. But, this concept that it sticks in people's mind, that the dollar is something everybody recognizes, and sort of recognizes that it has this common usage throughout the world. That isn't going to be overturned. But I think what is happening is that the real reserve currency is coming to be gold. That gold is giving, supplying a kind of common denominator. And I think the concept of fiat currencies, where, you say, look, you can trust us, we're good guys, we wouldn't cheat you, we'll here's some money, it's worth stuff, you can buy stuff with it, and we won't inflate the money system too much, and that's not credible anymore. Like, when you talk about a political system where you get sort of free money, all you do is charge it to your future generations, and well, they don't even exist yet, so what's to stop us from doing that? The fact that this is just too easy. In this kind of political system, there's nobody reliable within the political sphere to engage in the kind of trust that needs to take place in a fiat currency system. So that system has changed. Creating a whole alternative system to the dollar, I believe that is much more complex than we understand, and that there's really nobody sort of on the verge of just jumping in and coming up with a uniform system like the dollar has been. But the fact that gold seems to be called upon and increasingly seen as the sort of final resort when the inflation of the money system and is just stretched too far, which the United States has done with they give in to the temptation every time and still seem to have enormous power to just say, yeah, we can spend billions and trillions because we still have a credit card that you can build it up and build it up and build it up. And that was, of course, the idea with the non-aligned movement too, that the feeling was, okay, we're going to be able to ditch our European masters. They've gone bankrupt in World War II, and they're not in a position to govern us like they used to govern us. But we're nevertheless not out of the woods. There's this bipolar system, so we're going to be given this option. You can either join the Soviet system or the U.S. system. So you've got an option of, you've got one option with two choices.
Yes.
And people said, no, no way, and, you country like China, like India, like Indonesia, like huge populations with, vast numbers of indigenous peoples with their languages, with their ways of life. Like, we have our own way of relating to one another, and we will not be accepting the view that we are underdeveloped, the third world approach, that we are the first world and the second world. You guys are the underdeveloped world, the third world. And so there was a sense, no, we have our own systems, and we don't want to be held a hostage to this bipolar system. And so we're going to be non-aligned and do things our own way. And it seems to me that this BRICS system and multipolarism, as we're calling it now, continues this trajectory of history. And this trajectory of history gets stronger as the traditional imperial system rooted in the European empires and taken over largely by Britain and then by the United States, with their sort of ultimate progeny, Israel, as the ultimate settler colony, as a sort of distillation of this combined power of imperial rule, is now taking shape in Palestine, unoccupied Palestine. This is, there just isn't the same coercive power to force this on communities that don't want to be forced into that and want a multipolar world. They don't want to be said, you have to choose between this one or that one. But, there is this concept that China, Russia, and Iran, what if, U.S. enters that? And then, it just takes one more of the superpower. And then that's basically the matrix right there. And I can't help but feel that maybe people around Trump has a sense of this, that the breakthrough that could be made if we just said, well, let's just put aside this whole warring approach and let's do business. And, let's find ways to compete among ourselves in an orderly fashion and negotiate among ourselves and come up with something like a United Nations where there actually is some ability to enforce the law, unlike what we have now, and whether the initiative is taken by BRICS or, that why not imagine, that it's possible to imagine U.S. integrating into all of this, minus Zionism. Zionism can't be part of any of this. And then to what extent, though, is Putin, subject to Chabad Lubavitch, and it is actually, he does seem to have a lot of concern for these large number of Israeli citizens who are from Russia and continue to speak Russian and have, their connections with their Russian families in Russia and are, Israeli citizens as well. I mean, he does seem to be subject to a lot of influence from that. Israel has been involved with the Mao Zedong revolution, from its inception. And we certainly know that Israel and China were very in sync in sort of ripping off the fruits of the creative innovation in the United States and have collaborated in punishing the United States or using it as a cash cow, as a source of patents that can be stolen and whatnot. So we really don't know how Israel figures into this larger possibility. I just found myself saying, well, Zionism couldn't be part of this. Russia, China, Iran, and USA, but sort of finding myself veering back and saying, well, Zionism is just so integral to, the whole structure of how world politics happens. Most of it in a secretive way that we don't read very much about in the even in academic press or whatever. So, one has to be sort of circumspect and say, just remember, we're working with, very partial information.
Fantastic. For the last question, how viable are sanctions, tariffs, and trade wars as instruments of geopolitical leverage?
Well, I think a tariff system, if it had been properly conceived and planned, I mean, there's one way to think about income tax, which came in place in 1913. If you were going to have a Federal Reserve building up debt, you needed to have taxation of the people in countries. It started very modestly in 1913, and now has become a big factor. So and then there's this sort of, the more money you have and the more money you make, the more you are subject to higher rates, not only higher amounts, but higher rates of taxation. Another approach to getting money for governments is consumer taxes. When you buy something, you pay a tax, and that would be classic tariff. A tariff is a kind of tax. But in order to do a tariff properly, there would have to be a whole industrial policy that goes with it, which Trump doesn't have. He goes at it in this ad hoc fashion. And then the whole idea of people investing in the United States to create jobs for unemployed working people. I mean, that doesn't deal with robotization and AI and the fact that so much of the manufacturing of things is done without people. The people that are needed, who are the people who can run AI and people who can run robots and things, which is pretty skilled, specialized kind of knowledge. But the Joe Lunchbucket, getting the kind of job that he used to have in the 70s in a factory, that it just isn't the same anymore in that respect. So the tariff issue, if it had been done in a way that there had been a larger industrial calculation to go with it, what industries does U.S. intend to specialize in, and what incentives can it give to get people in a position to take part in and invest in these industries? What can happen in that regard? And there doesn't seem to be much thought given to this. There doesn't. It's just sort of changes from one day to the next, and the kind of happenstance way that Trump just comes up with something one day and then thinks about it differently the next day, and nobody, it's a classic situation for, well, you're not going to want to invest in a milieu like that, where you need predictability, and that's the United States is showing great unpredictability on tariff issues and other economic issues, and using sanctions is a kind of mark of sort of a failure of an economy, that if you have to get into coercion, do it our way or we're going to punish you economically, and there's going to be no universal rules for everybody. It's just going to be what we want in this situation or that situation, a political calculation. So how we go about building the new economy, with the understanding, I guess, that that there's going to have to be a lot of people who don't have formal paying jobs, who are on some kind of a welfare system or guaranteed income system, that there's going to have to be a lot more percentage of the global population that don't easily fit the old model of working for a living and being paid for the work you do and the quality of the work you do and such.
Thank you so much. Thank you for gracing us with your expertise and nuanced perspectives. Your analysis has profoundly deepened our grasp of today's intricate geopolitical realities. I'm immensely grateful for your time and invaluable contributions. If you have no more words, if you would like to add something more, I'm all ears. If no, I have to say goodbye.
Yeah. anyway, I'm watching your initiative popping up and finding it very interesting.
You're welcome.
And clearly you are looking at things in a kind of economic, with an economic emphasis, but broadly interpreting economics into the political economy of
Sure.
many subjects. So I encourage people to follow along with me and get familiar with your site. We don't have a whole bunch of sources in the West coming from within Iran, and from that perspective, so I do feel it's kind of a special privilege or a special honor to be able to communicate across that bridge. And communicating with you has caused me to remember that I've had quite a bit of experience with it over the years, not recently too much. And that made a big difference in my life, to start looking at the world with some understanding of how things look from the perspective of Iranian people, and all kinds of Iranian people, rich and poor, successful and not successful, religious and not religious. Like, it's a diverse community.
Sure.
So I appreciate being part of this discussion, and encourage those watching to take advantage of what we have here and help build it up, as I'm pleased to do. Thank you.